Hello and welcome to the Doublethink Dialogues podcast. So today we're talking about the cost of living crisis. So this is something that's, it's always been on the radar basically, but it's come on more on the radar with, I think, post-COVID, which many of us warned was going to happen with all the massive government spending. And then, of course, the bill always comes due, and now they're trying to scrounge back all the money, and that's also in some ways the cost. The money they've spent during COVID has led to, of course, massive inflation as well. So this is all hitting everyone of normal income levels pretty hard, and then especially those of lower income levels as well. So, of course, there are a lot of government services, but they're not necessarily enough. There's a lot of debate on what can be done, what is being done. And what's your take on this then, since this is one of sort of a special topic of yours?
Yeah, it's something I feel very passionately about. And I think the first reason why we have food banks, why people are struggling so badly, is that benefit levels are incredibly low. Just to ask you, put you on the spot, how much do you think a single person over the age of 25 would get if they were unemployed or sick or whatever for a week to live on?
On benefits per week?
For a week, yeah.
I don't even know what normal people get for a week.
Very helpful.
Probably, what would they get, a few hundred maybe?
Okay, this could come as a shock to you. If you're under 25, because obviously it seems like gas and electric must be somehow cheaper, you will get £73.02
per week. Okay.
Per week.
But most people of that age are either living at home or in university.
No, not necessarily. A lot live in bedsits and things like that. Over 25, because that's the magic age for some reason,
yeah.
You get £92.18. But if you're in a couple, you will get, for both of you, this is, so, all your living expenses. If you're under 25, you'll get £114.63. And if you're both over 25, you'll get £144.71 to live on.
Right.
So that's pretty low by anybody's standards. And if you have children, it gets even worse. The government introduced this thing that if your children were born after the 6th of April 2017, they would only pay for the first two children in the family. And even that has been reduced. That figure was reduced. For the first and second child born after 6th of April 2017, you get the grand sum of £67.39. But if you've got three children who would be under the age of 7, perhaps you've got, a baby and a pair of twins, you would only get benefits for the first two children.
Right.
And that's how it's worked out. It is pretty tight.
Right. The thing that comes to my mind, though, I suppose, is, and this is a numbers game, I guess, because you can argue there is a certain level of personal responsibility. Of course, there's social responsibility to the children as a general society. But so the idea, I guess, would be to understand what percentage of people are there because they've made poor choices versus what percentage of people are there because of bad, unfortunate circumstances.
I think that you have to be careful because then you end up blaming people for their poverty.
Well, in some cases you can blame them for their poverty.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's not a popular view necessarily, but there are some cases where it can be done.
But then you can blame people for their wealth. It's as random, isn't it?
Well, you should be able to blame them for their wealth because they earn their wealth many times. Not all the time. We're in England, I know. In North America, it's more that way. But in England, it's a lot of aristocracy and hereditary and stuff like that.
Yeah, but the thing is, whether you're born into the royal family or whether you're born to a single mother living in a bedsit with no just a very basic income, for the child, that is a purely random thing that happens.
Right.
Agreed. You can't influence that.
Right.
And indeed, even on life chances, if you're in a poor area, and we're here in Harrogate, which doesn't relatively have poor areas. There are pockets, but overall we're an affluent town. But if you go to some of the big cities like Leeds or Ripon, or if now in the Dales where you get little tiny pockets of rural poverty,
right,
and the children go to schools in their areas where there is low expectation. So I'll come on to the North Southern American way and pull that apart in a minute because I've thought that one through. But actually, low aspirations, you'll never come to anything.
So this is a question I think, and I sort of seen your crib notes for this as well. So and this leads, I think, into one of the issues of, and I do agree, like low aspirations, and I've often considered, let's say, people who are stuck in the poor system, the poor level of the financial structure. It's There has been some claims. This was by a lord when we arrived. I saw on television that the rich and powerful are genetically different, and obviously that seems like lunacy. But I would argue that they're at least mimetically different. So they have different ideals. Like they're taught from a young age they can be something and they should aspire to be something versus the average person in the what we call the public school system anyway, where they're not taught any of this. They're just kind of educated to be a sort of cog in the gears.
It depends where you are, because some of the schools in Harrogate are very much, even though they're state schools, they're very much about trying to push children onwards, meet aspirations. But there are some state schools where it's about, this is where we are, this is what we've got. There's very little support, certainly financial support from parents, because parents haven't got that money.
All right.
And yeah, you might be a hairdresser, you might be, you go and work in retail, whatever. But there's no, unless you get an exceptional teacher who picks up an exceptional pupil and will not go unnoticed, you're not going to push them. But actually, when you're looking at from your point of view, that is purely, there's two things there. One is attitude. If you're born into a wealthy family, you expect.
Right.
And if you haven't got it, you've got the money.
Yeah, you can be compensated. We've seen lots of examples of that. Yeah.
And they're not necessarily better people.
No, I agree.
But unfortunately, the way our society is now structured, and I would say the United States is sort of the worst example. If you're powerful and wealthy, you're somehow good. If at the bottom of the heap, it's got to be your fault.
Yeah, I would argue there's some truth in that, and some of the statistics. So Thomas Sowell is an American economist I listen to quite a bit, and he's gone through the idea that at least in America, and I think in Europe it is to a lesser degree, although UK is probably better than much of mainstream Europe. Arguably, I don't know, but that is that there's also social mobility. So I've just been listening to one of his books, Intellectuals and Society, where he's very critical of intellectuals, by the way. And yeah, well, we've just come through a period of history where we can have lots of examples of that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So what he's arguing though is that these discussions will tend to focus on classes versus individuals. And so when the studies are done, you'll say, okay, there's widening gaps between the classes, perhaps. But if you look at the individuals based on their tax returns, that there's actually quite a lot of mobility between the classes. So you'll often start in a lower class and then move up. Now that, of course, negates, and again, we're in the UK versus the US. So here we have a more official aristocracy, hereditary aristocracy, which kind of throws some of this out the window because those people are almost entrenched in their class. But for many other people, you still have social mobility. And that's something I think we tend to forget as well, because we teach our kids, oh, you'll never own that. And that's a very destructive idea as well.
Yeah. And of course, the other interesting thing, and I don't know if your person you're following looks at this, you have social mobility going up.
And down as well, yes.
And it's a down, It's like resilience studies. If you look at, and my background's working with children, if you look at two houses, same neighbourhood, same family circumstances, often quite grim family circumstances, and in one family, the whole family goes down. In the family next door, they'll fight through and they'll go up. There's more than just the straightforward.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. And he doesn't go into the specifics of it, but it is he does mention for one thing, when you talk about the rich getting richer, well, he's suggesting the individual rich, some of them will get richer, but some of them will also go down in their economic status as well. But I think what you're just saying, the example is, so this is also to do with attitude. Like so much of this is to do with attitude. And you can make your own opportunities with the right attitudes as well. And so if you're in an attitude of how to strive for success and sort of a upward spiral, right? then you can keep going upwards, and you won't feel a catastrophic failure if you have a failure, right? You can fail and then still keep moving forward upwards. Whereas I think if you have the other attitude, which can be, of course, taught by families very easily, every failure is just dwelled on and leads to the next failure in a downward spiral, more or less to the bottom.
American attitude. One of my favorite books, and I forgot to look it up because it's called Smile or Die: How Positive Thinking Ruined America. And it's an academic, and what she argues is, and again, it's United States, but I don't know if Canada's infected with the same stuff, but we're definitely getting like that. It doesn't matter what life throws you. You've got to pull yourself back up and you can get on and succeed. And that's very much the American attitude.
Oh, it was.
Oh, well, probably it still is. I've been talking by American friends.
Some parts of it still have it, yeah.
But when I was reading this, and what she was saying is, it takes no account of life's opportunities. So if you've got an illness that really pulls you back, say you've got a mental health illness, you can no more stop that than lots of other things. So just trying to say, well, you've got to get on and be positive.
So
it's actually quite damaging.
I don't think I agree with you on this one. So, and my wife, who is a doctor and neurologist, I don't think she would agree with you either. Because one of the things she says is really positive attitude is very important. So, for example, I have examples of family members with significant. Well, one had multiple sclerosis. And then one just retired and got arthritis and sort of fell apart. And the point is, in both of those cases, if you fight those, like you have a positive attitude, you fight those, they will progress often slower, the disease, and you'll have a better quality of life, right? If you just sort of give into it, then like with the MS, for example, he just went really bad, really fast.
Yeah.
And of course, he died at a very young age.
One of the nasties,
right? And then, but with my retired uncle, he just sort of lost the will and just sort of sat around, got arthritis, and then he died by the time he was 70. So like 5 years after he retired, basically, right? So I think that the attitude is very significant, and I think so. I would almost categorically disagree with that author, to be honest.
It's only half the story, because if you're at the bottom of the heap, and you know that, and there are people who are amazingly positive, but you've already got large stats. And if I can go back to my stats, because I'm very fond of my stats, it took me drumming out ages to put them all together. I did a cost of living thing. And I based it on our youngest son, because he was very helpful, because he lives in a very small one-bedroom flat. So we did expenses. We also used Martin's money. Martin was it money saving expert, and he does a lot of how to maximise benefits and what you can claim. And what we did, an estimated weekly costs, things like fuel, gas, electric, water rates, TV license, broadband. Now, everything, you need broadband, even if you're going to put in for universal credit. Right. It's online. So,
in fact, just to pause you there for a second, given that the fact they're going to go to digital banking and digital IDs all over Europe, I personally believe that the governments should essentially provide free broadband, for the simple reason that they're going to demand it from everyone to be able to use it. So.
But having gone back, and I think that's a fair point. We pay it just as an expense. But if you're on that kind of breadline, and I think the social tariff, I think the cheapest you could get was £2.76 a week, and that's what companies have to offer for people on benefits. But if you're getting £92.18 a week, your rent is paid, but there's an issue about rent. The council tax is paid, but apart from that, with everything for one person, no washing machine. He's got his own washing machine, but at that point he didn't. His actual cost in winter was actually £90.92, and that's the basics. Food.
All right, but how old was he?
It was Johnson's 40, so he's over 25. So that was quite useful as a.
Right, but he wasn't working then.
Well, he is working. Oh. but I use his figures,
right?
Not he is working, so
he's working, but he was living at home at the time.
No, this is what he spends in his flat.
Okay.
This is right. For keeping his flat. It's like water rates and TV license. That's all the things he has to pay. Mobile phone, £1 and 2p is if you just use a SIM card and you've already got your phone and it's paid for. He's eyeing up a new iPhone, so that's certainly not his cost.
Right.
And some of these costs are not his, but put together with Money Saving Expert. For winter, and this month he spent £80 on gas, just on gas, not on electric as well. It's £90 and 92. And that doesn't include any form of travelling, like bus fares or anything like that. And that issue of keeping a car if you live in a rural area, and that's a huge issue around.
Unfortunately. You'd think in England it would be better, but it's not.
It's awful. I put on this presentation, no pets, no haircuts, no treats, no going out.
He's a guy, so a haircut wouldn't cost much anyway.
Somebody's going to be scouting me. That'll be for free. But there's no social life, there's no celebrations.
I don't consider those significant, to be honest. If you're on a budget, then you work on a budget, right? I mean, if you and you work your way up, that is the sort of the American idea, is that if you can't afford it, then you don't buy it, unless you absolutely need it, and then you have to find a way to get it. Yeah.
But that's for a single person living very frugally. I mean, we even costed out food and how little you could survive on.
Right, but the average salary then in for a 40-year-old in the UK, do you have any idea what that is?
No.
So I don't particularly, but I know overall it's like 26,000 or something, which comes out to just over 2,000 a month. Subtract taxes from that.
Yeah, so it's rather less
around about 1,500 probably. Yeah.
Which is very different. But if you're on benefits for whatever reason, either you're out of work or, I mean, lots of people in the Dale often have 3 jobs between them. So you'd get a young family. Dad would work full time and probably at the weekend as well. And the mum would stay at home and look after children, but she'd also do odd jobs whenever she could get them. And say, the father's in a car accident or falls off a ladder and breaks a leg. Then suddenly they're reduced down to very, very low pay. The other issue we have on benefits, which is a big issue, certainly affluent areas like ourselves, you get your rent paid for, but the rents are often capped. So councils will pay for like social housing associations, but private rentals are much higher than the cap.
Yeah.
So as well as paying your everyday bills, some families also have to find the cap, the big difference between the cap and what they're actually paying in rent. So you can see, particularly if you've got children, and how you would very quickly spiral into debt.
Yeah. So one thing that would come to mind is we do often use perhaps reasonably, perhaps unreasonably, I don't know. This is where the heartstrings come in, I think, is with what happens if one of the family members gets injured? Well, as a general rule, we're not really talking about that because we're talking about people who are sort of perpetually on benefits.
Well, no, it only takes you for something, or unemployment. I mean, at the moment, we're in a relatively, there's lots of jobs out there. No pay, but there are jobs out there. Now, I remember when Jonathan finished university, it was the Great Global Recession hit, fueled by American subprime mortgages. He couldn't get a job for
which Rishi Sunak was involved with as well.
Oh, of course. They've all got their sticky fingers in them. But he couldn't get a job for less than money. So as a student, like most students, he came out with debts and that. So we supported him. If we hadn't been able to support him, he would have gone under. And I think there are lots and lots of young people, come out of university. They're encouraged to go to university.
Right, which is a mistake, in my opinion.
I think there is definitely something about, is this really what you want to do?
Yes, exactly. The university has taken advantage of this, of a lot of things, but of the attitudes that they've managed to create towards university as well. But I was wondering, when you say there's not any work, was it a matter that there wasn't any work in his field or at all?
Nothing. Like he eventually got a part-time job working at W.H. Smith in Ripon, which was great because it gave him a reference.
Right.
and then he was able to build on that.
Yeah, because that's the important thing, is building up. Yeah.
But, jobs he went, they certainly weren't graduate jobs like all his friends.
That's true.
And in fact, he said this generation that finished university between about 2009 and 2013, they're like the lost generation of graduates. Because unless you're working on going for something specific, like medicine or whatever, engineering or whatever, if you come out with an arts degree, which you won't do, and you don't particularly want to train as a teacher
or an HR person or
whatever.
That's where a lot of them go. Yeah.
Yeah. There was nothing, and there was nothing even in the well-paid jobs. People were hanging on desperately to well-paid jobs. Some of the big banks went under. Of course.
I think that this is an important point to note as well. As I think also one thing that probably happened after that was the growing realization that maybe you need to consider what you're doing when you go to university as a financial trade-off. And maybe it's not like our generation, or at least my generation, was all about you have to go to university. It's the only way forward. And I think now it's really become clear that that's a bit of a scam, and the universities have definitely taken advantage of that.
Well, my generation, because I'm obviously incredibly old, it was you leave school as soon as possible.
Yeah.
I was unusual, actually. O-levels. I'm a girl, remember, so that made a big difference.
Just for the record, for all those who aren't sure about what a woman is.
Yeah. But when I left school, girls were not encouraged to stay on to sixth form. Certainly not working 12s girls. So what else happened? I became a civil servant. But it was still the attitude. If you went to work for people like the banks, Barclays banks, the big banks, they would take school leavers, female school leavers. But when you got married, they would give you a payment because you would be leaving when you got married.
Yeah, to have children.
This is the 70s. This isn't the 1870s.
Yeah.
So the attitude has changed.
So we've overcompensated in some ways, but this is a topic we need to have you back on for discussing. Is because one question would be, it has changed. It's essentially exactly a mirror version of what it was. So is that better, or should we really be working with something in the middle? But that's not really the topic of today. So
back to why people are using food banks, why so many people are struggling. I mean, there was a report from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which is a very well-respected research body. And last year they did a survey of social workers, because they tend to work with the most disadvantaged families. And they found that 60% of the children that social workers were working with were actually in destitution. They dropped below poverty to absolutely nothing.
What I'm wondering is, do they ever do an assessment of the parents' spending in these cases? Because we know families, for example, that are sort of minimum wage families with children, and they still go out to dinner all the time. They still get their, go to the pubs. They still do all of this stuff. And then they say, oh, well, we don't have enough money to give our kids lunch or something. And I find spending priorities may be a little bit messed up in some cases.
One day I'll do a parenting assessment on you, and then after I scrape you off the floor, you'll feel better about it. Believe me, we no longer I am retired, thank goodness. We go into everything, and spending is a big thing. But there's also an issue that because of change of government, of course we hit austerity, didn't we? The Conservatives were very proudly boasting we're now in austerity. Never seemed to affect them or their families and their friends, but we're all in it together.
Let's face it, though, it didn't affect the powerful Labour members either. So, so we have to be fair there. Yes.
We could talk about that. But one of the things they did do was bring in all sorts of cuts that directly impacted people with the lowest income. So to give you an example, huge cuts in benefits paid to disabled people. And the way they did it is they changed the criteria so far fewer could meet the criteria, so they didn't have to pay the disability benefits.
Right. Yeah, that's common practice, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, if you ever watch The Last Leg, Alex Brooker, who is to be quite funny when he's not being found out, but that's a personal opinion. But as he said, he had a leg missing. He's very disabled with his hands. And as he keeps telling the benefits agency, my leg isn't going to grow back. But they cut his benefits,
Right.
And
So,
he's high profile.
right. So what I'm wondering, and this goes maybe deeper into this, because one thing we can do to help this, of course, is throw benefits and throw money and taxpayer money at it. Another thing we can do is try to create systems which give these people value as well, right? And you say, okay, well, they have inherent human value, which is right, of course. But the point is, you know,
well,
but we know like people derive their own personal self-worth quite often from their place in society and what they offer to society, or at least to their families. And so the point, and this is also for those who still believe in the wage gap, for example. I would argue also in relation to women. We've tried to increase women's value in society by putting them into jobs that men traditionally did or traditionally preferred and women traditionally didn't prefer. We try to force them in, encourage them to go in, but why not give value to the preferences they already have, which is an important part of society. And I'm thinking more value to teaching, more value to care working, more value even to being a mother raising children, right? And so with people with disabilities, can we not create systems where they can produce value as well? They can harness their ability rather than maybe they're sitting at home or something.
The law says that. But to pick you back on the point about valuing jobs like care work and stuff like that.
Oh, we don't, I know, and it's expensive.
And what we actually have, it's like a pyramid economy. And if you look at NHS hospitals, that's a really good example. At the top, you've got the consultants. You've also got the directors and the great and good who run the hospital.
Too many of them, probably.
Absolutely. And that's always the argument, but I think that's probably a separate argument.
Yes.
Then you get like the middleman. So you get the nurses, the physiotherapists, the occupational therapist, all the sort of the professional middleman. But much bigger band are the porters,
nurses and things. Cleaners.
Nurses are in the middle.
Okay.
Healthcare assistants come at the bottom.
Right.
But it's all the porters, the cleaners, the people, low-paid admin workers who are very, very poorly paid.
Yeah, the thing with cleaners is there's a lot of stuff we don't catch not being in this system. And there's something, I don't know if they're outsourcing this recently. They did a lot of changes in COVID. They're very sneaky. The politicians never really stopped sleeping on this stuff. So during COVID, when the rest of us were locked up, they were busy restructuring certain parts. I mean, they offloaded, for example, ear syringing out to private companies now. And I know that, again, from my wife, that they have to, now the consultants have to change their own garbage bins. So there's no one coming in necessarily to do a thorough cleaning of the rooms anymore.
Do you know why that is?
So probably financial savings, I'm guessing. But
and I have to say, when I see the junior doctors on strike, it's very hard not to go up to them and give them a real ear. Because what Harrogate Hospital did, and there was no protest from the higher ups, they decided to in effect privatise the porters.
Well, that's what I was thinking, yeah.
And put them into a separate company, which the directors ran, no doubt for a big fat fee.
Yeah, that's the sneaky part.
But of course, if you take people out of the NHS, you don't have to pay NHS pensions.
Right.
And surprise, surprise, they can no longer attract people to do those totally necessary jobs. But why would you go and clean a ward or several wards for minimum pay without the holidays, the pension, the other things?
Yeah.
And the fact that your wife as a consultant is emptying her own waste bins is ridiculous. She's a very, very expensive.
Well, the another thing is they also aren't allowed to use the white coats anymore. I mean, that's been for like about a decade or more in the England, in the NHS. And they're told it's because it's supposed to make them look more relatable to the average person who's coming to see them. But I think we can probably guess that it's because they want to reduce the cleaning bills, right?
Absolutely. But your total economy is these are the people you meet. You can't operate in a theatre without the domestics going in. And back in the dark ages, I was a domestic supervisor for one of the big London hospitals. And part of my area was the theatres. Now, I do hope it's still the same. But my domestics used to go in every day. They used to clean the ceiling, the walls, everything.
Yeah.
So it's spotless. And in fact, I had to go and examine to make sure they were spotless. Really, really important work on what was less than minimum wage because we didn't have minimum wage there.
Yeah.
And very responsible. Why would you want to pick up a job like that? And even if you do that, there's no real progression in that. You can't be a super cleaner.
Yeah, you need to go to another job eventually once you build up. Yeah.
So that's it. And I put it on Manchester United because I guess you had you look at football clubs, especially like to Manchester United. It's a global brand.
Right.
Everybody knows. Go anywhere in the world, somebody's bound to be a Manchester United supporter. I can tell that from bitter experience, having been married to a Manchester United supporter. He's grinning over there, pretending to ignore me. That's my husband, if you're not in the room at the moment. Manchester United, very, very successful. Now, our ex-sister-in-law, her mum and her mum's friends, for over 20 years, went every match day to Manchester United's ground, Old Trafford, and made sandwiches. Really, it was an extra job, money on the side. But, regular income,
right,
such as football can be regular income. 1990s, Manchester United, with all their millions, and they were multi-million even in the 90s, decided they wanted somebody else in, and they just cut their contracts dead. And when they said, well, this can't be right, they said, no, you're self-employed, you're not entitled to redundancy. There's a lot of that. I have to say, I was all for arranging a big protest. I would have had the television there. I had to have had everybody there, the media. Unfortunately, Kath's mum was a very quiet lady, lovely lady, and the idea of making a fuss was completely.
Yeah.
She couldn't do that. I'd have been there with the band.
I think this feeds into a bigger topic, and we're probably not going to have time for it on this episode, but basically the level of corruption at the top. Then, so we can argue that there's a lot of social change needed. There's multiple ways we could potentially restructure society in a more beneficial way for most people. But I think the example you gave, for example, if you looked into it, you would have discovered that it was some director of Manchester United who was running the food companies, the catering companies that they wanted to bring in, right? So they just feed into their own. It's again, and same thing with the cleaners you mentioned with the NHS. And we see also like with the big companies, I think G4S was one. I don't know if they still name the same things. That basically what they are is they're taxpayer money sinks, aren't they? They provide services, but they're run so that they take the taxpayer money and it's sort of funneled into those companies so that we in fact lose out in the end.
Well, corruption is not, in this country at least, it's not about handing over brown envelopes with wads of cash. It's much more subtle than that. So
I think it is overall everywhere in the West now. It's become an art form in a way.
Yes. I wouldn't do anything else as vulgar, but might offer you a directorship of a company or doing a favour for somebody. It's that but it's still corruption.
Yeah.
You're not choosing the best person because they can provide the best service. It's because you profit directly or indirectly. And that is a huge problem we have in this country.
Yeah, well, two very, I think on the last note here, two well-known examples of that have come to light recently in regards to, let's say, international dealings is Tony Blair and David Cameron, of both sort of involved in areas that they don't seem to have necessarily the track record to support their involvement in.
You mean to say they're crooked? Yeah, absolutely.
in a way. But I think we are getting on, so we're going to have have a further discussion on this because I'm sure you have a lot more notes you want to bring into this.
Yeah, can I just very quickly
yes, definitely
finish off because we have rather sort of gone around the houses, but that's absolutely fine. I think my personal these are my personal things. First of all, we need to rethink attitudes towards poverty and don't blame people for lack of money. It's not, if you're born in a poor family, that is not your fault. Things go wrong. You told me to laugh at that.
It is.
We need to think about the benefit system because there's a lot of criticism about the benefit system and keeping people on a benefit system. Actually, the biggest people who are benefit receivers are people who collect their state pension. But that's fine. That's acceptable. That we can live with that. But we need to look at how the benefit system is used and abused and how it's funded, because I think that there is a discussion of how that is funded.
Right.
But there's also an issue when you look at benefits. There are millions every year that are underclaimed. People aren't claiming the benefits they're entitled. So That needs to be looked at. And my final thing, which makes me really cross, are the PAYE pay. I've never had any chance of earning extra or given extra. I've always been morally upright because I've never had the opportunity to do anything else.
So you're not corrupt because you haven't had the chance to be corrupt.
Absolutely. But everybody needs to pay their fair share of tax. So companies and directors didn't have ways of fiddling the way that they paid tax. And they actually paid, even if everybody did a flat 20%, you've got rid of the higher rate, companies paid the fair share. They didn't suddenly decide, despite making squillions in the United Kingdom, all their income is offshore. Things like, if we all paid, including our own dear royal family, a fair amount of tax, we would be a lot better off. I wouldn't say that's perfect either, because you'll never get a perfect system. But the way it is, again, talk about corruption, how people sometimes quite legally fiddle the tax system to avoid paying.
Well, I think it probably is mostly legally.
I don't know.
And we could go into a lot on that, I think, but that's probably for another episode. So I think we'll have to call that for today.
Okay, that's fine.
So thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed, please share, give us a comment, and subscribe to Doublethink Dialogues, and we'll talk to you in the next episode.